At the beginning of the film, we see archival footage of an archaeological expedition in a remote region of Mexico, where multiple scientists discover numerous headless skeletons. They also find a large stone box surrounded by butterflies at the bottom of a pit as they begin to lift it. Meanwhile, in a present-day apartment, a woman named Simona is talking on the phone, unaware that someone is attempting to open her door. While she's still on the call, she notices a strange footprint in her room. Moments later, the lights abruptly go out and her phone call is cut off. The footprint she just spotted also vanishes. In the darkness of her apartment, Simone hears something fall in the dining area and goes to investigate. She sees nothing unusual until she looks toward the window, where she notices a butterfly fluttering. But when she turns back, an eerie stone box has appeared in the middle of the room. Unaware that a ghostly figure is lurking behind her, Simone focuses on the box, which is shaking as though something inside is trying to get out. Suddenly, a hand emerges and drags her away. Elsewhere, a truck carrying undocumented immigrants drops off a group in an isolated area. Among them is a woman named Ambar, who quickly disembarks and walks off alone. 2 weeks pass. At the motel where Ambar has been staying, the staff demands identification that she doesn't have. At her job, Ambar comes across a flyer advertising cheap rooms for women, which immediately catches her attention. After work, she goes to see the place and meets Red, the owner of the boarding house. There, she also notices Freya, who Red explains is the only other tenant and has some difficulty speaking English. That night, while listening to a recording of her late mother's voice, Ambar hears heavy sobbing that seems to come from the floor below. Curious, she investigates a vent and spots Freya crying in her room. Later, when Ambar is looking at a photo with her mother, recalling their memories in the hospital, she remembers how her mother had once asked her to remain by her side. Early the next morning, as Ambar locks her door, she notices a strange powder on the doorknob. She brushes it off and steps into the hallway, which suddenly goes dark. She quickly flips the lights back on, but as soon as she leaves, the hallway lights flicker and go out again. Downstairs, she greets Freya and remarks that the two of them seem to be the only people staying in the house. Freya replies that Red is full of nonsense, which Ambar finds puzzling. Later, Ambar has difficulties at work when her boss criticizes her performance. After finishing her shift, she meets her friend Kinsey, who informs her that the fake ID they planned on buying has become more expensive than they initially thought. Disappointed, Ambar hesitates, but decides she might not be able to pay. That evening, she visits her cousin Beto. He offers her a job interview scheduled for Friday, reminding her to bring proper identification. He also gives her an old coat that once belonged to his wife, Sylvia, who seems none too happy about it. Returning to the boarding house, Ambar hears an odd noise coming from a locked room at the end of the hall and notices deep scratch marks on the door. Suddenly, Red appears and tells her that the basement is his personal space. Disturbed by what she has seen, Ambar insists on getting her deposit back, but Red refuses, claiming he has already spent it. Back in her room, Ambar counts her remaining money and again hears muffled crying. Concerned, she goes to check on Freya. Instead, she finds an empty, abandoned bedroom, no Freya in sight, and the same mysterious powder around the door. Alarmed, Ambar rushes out, unaware that Freya's spirit is quietly observing her from the shadows. That night, Ambar dreams of her mother in the hospital. In the dream, her mother suddenly turns to look at a strange stone box in the corner of the room. When Ambar looks over, she sees the box begin to open. A gnarled hand emerges from inside, and she jolts awake in terror. The next morning, Ambar begs her boss for an early paycheck, but he turns her down and transfers her to the packaging department. While packing goods, she feels a hand on her shoulder and hears her mother calling her, though no one else seems to notice. Later that evening, Ambar goes out for drinks with Kinsey and explains why she was so desperate for that fake ID. She also confides that her mother's death drove her to move to the United States, hoping to start anew. Seeing how distraught Ambar is, Kinsey offers to cover the extra fee for the ID, and Ambar gratefully hands over the cash she's saved. On her way home, she walks down a deserted street, unaware that the streetlights behind her are blinking off one by one. Finding this odd, she turns to look over her shoulder, then glances at the lamp above her, noticing a butterfly fluttering inside it. Startled, she hurries away, missing the moment when the lights behind her flicker back on, revealing a fleeting glimpse of her mother's figure. When Ambar finally arrives at the boarding house, she sees a strange man banging his head against the basement door. He utters words she doesn't understand. Uncomfortable, Ambar ignores him and heads straight to her room. As she puts on her socks, she catches sight of someone outside, standing at her door, reciting strange phrases. She watches warily as the man, who turns out to be Red's brother Becker, leaves behind a powdery mark on her door before walking away. Later in the kitchen, Ambar meets two women named Mary and Petra, her new neighbors. While they're chatting, Red shows up and leads Mary and Petra out, reminding Ambar of his brother Becker. After they leave, Ambar, still thinking about Becker's strange behavior, ventures downstairs toward Red's private space. There she finds a voice recording of what sounds like a ritual incantation, along with a book about human sacrifices. She also discovers photographs of two men posing with the same stone box that's been haunting her dreams. The next morning, Ambar heads out for her job interview arranged by Beto. She attempts to call Kinsey for her new ID, only to discover that Kinsey is suddenly unreachable. That day, Ambar goes to work as usual and asks her boss about Kinsey, only to learn that Kinsey has quit. Frustrated, she accidentally snaps at her boss, who immediately fires her. Afterward, Ambar repeatedly tries calling Kinsey, but the number remains out of service. When she finally returns to the boarding house, she takes a shower and hears someone screaming from the vent below. Hoping to investigate, she sees Freya standing behind the curtain. But when Ambar draws the curtain back, Freya's figure vanishes. Startled, Ambar rushes out and collides with Red in the hallway. She demands to know where Freya is, and Red claims that Freya moved out several days ago. He then promises to return Ambar's deposit the following day. Relieved, she agrees and heads to her room, leaving Red staring after her with an unsettling look. Later that night, the basement door swings open, releasing a butterfly that drifts upstairs. In her room, Ambar listens to a voice recording of her mother. Suddenly, a butterfly appears, and she kills it in alarm, only to hear her mother's voice again. Before she can collect her thoughts, she's startled by another flurry of wings and follows the sound until she sees her mother calling to her. Terrified, she wakes from what was apparently a dream and realizes her bedroom door is now wide open. From somewhere outside comes the sound of sobbing. She steps out to find footprints forming right alongside that same eerie crying, which grows closer. In that moment, she witnesses a vision belonging to the house's ghosts, revealing memories of Red's mother and grandmother. The cries lead her toward the basement, where she sees Red's mother being dragged away by something lurking in the darkness.
Please let me.
Overcome with fear, Ambar packs her belongings and calls Beto, begging him to pick her up. Unfortunately, he and his family are out of town. Desperate, Ambar searches the house for Red, hoping to get her money back, but finds only Becker, who tersely informs her that Red is away. Deciding she has no choice, she abandons the boarding house and tries to rent a room at various motels, only to be turned away each time. She eventually takes refuge in a vacant building, listening to her mother's old recordings. While dozing off on a train soon after, the lights suddenly flicker and go out, and all the other passengers vanish. This leaves Ambar alone with an apparition of her mother, who watches as the nightmare stone box opens once again to reveal a monstrous hand. Jolting awake, she finds herself in a small diner, anxiously waiting for Red so he can finally hand over her deposit. When Red arrives, he claims he was out of town and forgot her money at home. He also explains that Becker's odd behavior is a result of his illness. After settling the bill, he persuades Ambar to return with him to the house to get her refund. The moment they arrive, Red insists the cash is in Ambar's room. As she heads there, she politely declines Mary's offer of a drink, leaving her suitcase near the door. Once inside, however, she finds no money and grows increasingly nervous when Red blocks her path. He confesses that he has no choice but to do what Becker demands, because Becker needs him. Moments later, Becker appears, reciting cryptic phrases, and forces Ambar to drink wine. Red takes Ambar's phone away, then leaves with Becker, so Ambar quickly locks herself in. Shaking with fear, she's startled again when Mary and Petra turn up. Equally frightened, Petra admits she has been plagued by the same visions of the strange stone box that also haunt Ambar. She suggests that it must be hidden in a forbidden area of the house. Distressed sobs echo up through the floor vents in Ambar's room, and Mary murmurs that those are the voices of previous victims who disappeared in this place. They all fall silent, until Petra begins to hum a soft melody. Ambar suddenly notices the spirit of one of Red's victims lurking beside her. The ghost vanishes, and so do Mary and Petra, leaving Ambar alone. In that ghostly haze, she catches sight of her mother, who pleads with her to stay in the house forever. But the illusion fades when Ambar snaps awake to see Petra being dragged away by Red. Though Ambar tries to fight back, Becker intercepts her. At that very moment, the doorbell rings, prompting Becker to lock Ambar in a room before he goes downstairs. Red opens the door and finds Beto there, demanding to see Ambar. On the upper floor, Ambar shatters a window and shouts for Beto. Spotting her, Beto shoves past Red and runs to rescue her, only to be attacked by Becker the instant he enters the room.
I just want to be sure, you know?
Hombre.
Beto is mortally wounded, leaving Ambar terrified and blaming herself for his fate. Tied up and unable to move, Ambar is carried into another chamber, where she sees Becker dragging Mary toward the basement. Red proceeds to smear the same strange powder on Ambar's skin, all while she pleads with him to abandon this cursed house. Red seems tempted to end the ritual, but Becker reappears. He has fresh claw marks on his arm that mysteriously heal as Ambar watches in horror. Becker spreads more powder and smears blood on her face, then hauls her down into the basement. On their way, Ambar glimpses the apparitions of other women who were once sacrificed here. Inside the chamber, Becker drags out Mary's lifeless body and leaves Ambar alone with the ominous stone box, now wide open and ringed by butterflies. Suddenly, Beto appears in Ambar's feverish vision, helping her escape through a corridor where she sees another decapitated victim. As the atmosphere grows more surreal, she stumbles upon her mother's hospital bed and forces open a door. But Beto is nowhere to be seen. Instead, she finds herself facing the box again, witnessing her past self caring for her ailing mother. Realizing it's all a nightmare, Ambar sees that her real body is still lying on the sacrificial table. A monstrous being emerges from the box, while the version of her mother in this dream demands that she stay by her side. When Ambar refuses, the motherly figure morphs into something hideous and tries to strangle her. Ambar breaks free and strikes the specter with a pillow, ending its threat. In the real basement, the creature abandons her motionless form. Ambar suddenly regains consciousness, rushes to the box, and finds only a skeletal figure inside. Hearing Petra's agonized cries, Ambar limps upstairs and notices a weapon in Red's private room. Meanwhile, Becker grows uneasy and urges Red to check the noise, which leads to a confrontation with Ambar. Just as he tries to finish her off, Petra briefly regains consciousness and distracts him. He hurls Petra down the main staircase and turns back to Ambar, who desperately grabs a broken piece of the weapon. Becker attempts to strangle her, but she musters enough strength to strike him hard. He collapses, dying on the spot. Finally free, Ambar spots Red lying injured below. She drags him into the ritual chamber, intending to make him the new offering. Realizing his fate, Red pleads with Ambar as she watches him being consumed by a strange figure. However, Ambar leaves him behind and locks the basement room. At the end of the film, we see Ambar limping past a room where Red is silently staring at her. Ignoring him, she continues on, and soon notices something strange. Her wounds are healing on their own, and even her previously broken leg is able to walk normally. Realizing the effect of the ritual she performed, Ambar looks at a butterfly that lands on her hand, and the film ends. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe, because by subscribing you have supported me to make better videos. See you in the next video.